we got to talk about one of the messiest and most controversial and convoluted stories I've had to cover in some time. One that honestly pulls at different values I strongly believe in, from free speech to national security to due process to opposing terror and support for violence. This is the Trump administration's highly controversial move to deport a leader of the Columbia University anti-Israel protests, arguably pro-Hamas protests, by revoking his green card and having him deported. This has become a huge story. Not all the facts are totally clear, but here's some News Nation reporting to kind of just set the ground floor of what happened, and then we're going to get into what both sides are saying about it, and then I'll give you my take. Take a listen to this from News Nation.
The president's promise to crack down on what he calls illegal campus protests, now putting Columbia University directly in the crosshairs. Mahmoud Khalil is waking up in ICE custody this morning. The Palestinian activist led chaotic protests that occupied buildings and sparked demonstrations on campuses across the country. News Nation's Brooke Schaefer has the very latest. And Brooke, the crux of this case is that Khalil's green card might be revoked over this, right?
Marky, this Columbia grad student and Palestinian activist now in federal immigration custody, facing deportation this morning. Federal agents telling his attorney they are following State Department orders to revoke the student's visa and green card. ICE agents arrested Mahmoud Khalil in his university apartment in New York over the weekend. Khalil was one of the leaders during the pro-Palestinian protest on Columbia's campus last spring. He was one of the most visible people involved in those protests, one of the few to publicly share his name. The Department of Homeland Security overnight accused Khalil of leading activities promoting and aligning with Hamas, which they say violates President Trump's order banning anti-Semitism on college campuses. President Trump has promised to crack down on students who joined in protest against the war in Gaza, claiming that by supporting Hamas, students have forfeited their right to remain in the U.S. Khalil's arrest over the weekend, the first publicly known deportation effort to follow those threats from the Trump administration. Khalil, who reports say grew up in Syria, is a legal permanent resident, according to his attorney. He's also married to a U.S. citizen who is 8 months pregnant.
So those are kind of just the facts of the situation, but let's take a quick look at how many people on the left are discussing it. Many of them are framing this as if it's some sort of obviously illegal and authoritarian and fascist crackdown against free speech. For example, here is DNC Vice Chair David Hogg.
Today, the Trump administration took one more step on their authoritarian march, detaining Palestinian student and recent graduate of Columbia University, Mahmoud Khalil. When ICE agents detained him, he was next to his wife, who's been pregnant for 8 months. And when his lawyers called the ICE agents who were detaining him to ask for a warrant, they literally hung up on his lawyer. This is a blatant violation of the Constitution. This is a blatant violation of our rights. And this is a threat to Americans everywhere. Regardless of whether or not you're a Democrat, Republican, independent, or otherwise, all of us need to be extremely concerned about this. Donald Trump is trying to shut down young people and stop us from speaking out, because he, like all other authoritarians, believe that they have to shut down freedom of speech, freedom of expression, so that they can rule like a king. In this country, we don't bow to kings, and we need our young people to stand up to Donald Trump, because he knows that we are one of the biggest threats against him. This is bullshit. This is happening, and we can't let it stand.
Side note, I will get into it later, but I did find it annoying how he conflates this with all young people. This is very clearly about the rights and limits of speech of non-citizens, not U.S. citizens. So conflating it with all young people like that is demagogic. Other progressive commentators similarly went apoplectic over this. Young Turks founder Cenk Uygur tweeted, "Mahmoud Khalil is Trump's first political prisoner. They charged him with the crime of being anti-Semitic. There is no such crime. In America, you're allowed to think or say anything you like, and they have no evidence he was anti-Semitic. He was arrested for criticizing Israel." It's a lot more complicated than that, though. For another perspective, here's what Jewish-Israeli Columbia professor Shai Devarai had to say. "Like Mahmoud Khalil, I am too on a green card. Unlike Khalil, I don't support U.S.-designated terrorist organizations, take over university buildings, and call for the genocide of anyone. He wasn't arrested for speaking up. He was arrested for breaking the conditions of his stay here. Now, one of the points that Trump supporters of this action, at least, are making is that there's federal laws that seem to authorize this kind of action. As Reason's Eugene Volka pointed out, 8 U.S.C. 1182A3 provides that any alien who endorses or espouses terrorist activity or persuades others to endorse or espouse terrorist activity or support a terrorist organization is inadmissible to the United States. He goes on to say that this law makes it clear that such aliens are also deportable once they are here. Volka writes, Congress then has authorized both denying visas to people based on their speech endorsing a wide range of violence and deporting based on such speech people who have already been admitted. Nor is this limited to illegal aliens. It is also applicable to lawfully admitted visitors, including those under student visas, and, as best as I can tell, those who are lawful and long-time permanent residents. What Volka points out, though, is that these federal laws have not been taken all the way to the Supreme Court as to the question of whether they're consistent with the First Amendment. So while there's law authorizing this, they could theoretically challenge it on First Amendment grounds, because there is some Supreme Court precedent saying that legal immigrants are entitled to some degree of First Amendment rights, even though they're not citizens. It's a common misconception that the US Constitution only confers rights upon people who are citizens, but actually no, it does confer some rights on non-citizens and immigrants as well. Now, I want to set aside this individual for a moment because a lot of the facts need to come out about exactly what he said and did and the situation around him. And just to talk about this conceptually for a minute, do you really have the right to come into this country as a non-citizen and then openly endorse and support terrorism? I don't know that you do. Now, to be clear, I don't think people should be deported for simply criticizing Israel or even for being anti-Semitic, because that's subjective. What counts, that's just what offends a particular person. But engaging in illegal protests where you occupy buildings or openly supporting designated terrorist organizations may be a different story. That said, it does all rely on this question of whether green card holders who are lawful permanent residents to the United States are entitled to First Amendment rights. Somebody like someone on a student visa has less rights because they're just a temporary visitor. They would probably have a stronger case just focusing on those people. But if green card holders are entitled to full First Amendment rights, then deporting them for this speech would be unconstitutional, unless they did actions that constituted material aid in support of a terror group. Simply broadly advocating for violence or in support of a terrorist organization actually is protected as First Amendment protected speech. The only exception is for incitement, but that has to be extremely imminent lawless action. So in the moment, telling someone, go punch that guy, rob that bank, not just in general saying, I think robbing a bank should be legal. That's allowed. In the same way, you couldn't actively encourage an ongoing act of terror, but you could broadly say, I think 9/11 was justified, or some other sort of evil, unhinged statement, and that would be First Amendment protected speech, no matter how reprehensible and vile it is. So, if green card holders are entitled to First Amendment full protections, then retaliating against them and deporting them for this speech would be unconstitutional. So a lot rests on that ultimate determination. And on that point, I think the Trump administration is to some degree making a mess of things by conflating two different things: supporting literal terrorism and saying offensive things. If they solely focused on we will deport people who support official recognized terror groups, they'd be in much stronger territory. But they are conflating it with other things, as Trump did in his statement about all this. He wrote on Truth Social, "Following my previously signed executive orders, ICE proudly apprehended and detained Mahmoud Khalil, a radical foreign pro-Hamas student on the campus of Columbia University. This is the first arrest of many to come. We know there are more students at Columbia and other universities across the country who have engaged in pro-terroristic, anti-Semitic, anti-American activity, and the Trump administration will not tolerate it." So this is a problem. He's conflating pro-terrorism speech with things that are anti-American or anti-Semitic. According to who? The government? So what ideas they just find upsetting or offensive, that does this whole thing a massive disservice and very much muddies the waters. It also almost certainly has a chilling effect on people's ability and willingness to say their opinions and express themselves on college campuses or just in general, which is really important to the function of an open campus atmosphere. Because now, well, what if the Trump administration thinks my speech is offensive or anti-American? That's so subjective. That will chill people's speech and their ability to express themselves without fear of repercussions. But again, if they had just focused on deporting and targeting people not for offensive speech, not for anti-American speech, not for anti-Semitism, but for actual support of registered terrorist organizations, they'd be on much stronger footing. But even then, I would have some problems with this particular individual's case and how it's being handled. The main issue I have with how this particular situation went down is related to due process rights, the right to fair and transparent proceedings, which is a constitutional right that, yes, lawful permanent residents like green card holders are entitled to. If his side of the story about how this all went down is true, then it appears to me that his due process rights were violated. As CNN reports, Khalil was apprehended by two plainclothes Department of Homeland Security agents at the university-owned apartment building where he lives with his wife, a U.S. citizen. To be clear, this information is coming from Writers Against the War on Gaza, which is a source that is biased on one side of this conflict and in support of Khalil. The DHS agents said that the State Department revoked Khalil's student visa, although he does not have a student visa, but rather a green card, and is a lawful permanent resident, the group said. When Khalil's wife, who is 8 months pregnant, showed the agents his green card, one agent was visibly confused and said on the phone he has a green card, according to the news release. However, after a moment, the DHS agents stated the State Department had revoked that too. Khalil's wife then phoned his attorney, who spoke with the agents in an attempt to intervene, the group said. When Khalil's attorney requested that a copy of the warrant be emailed to her, the agent hung up the call. So we have to ultimately find out if this account of how things went down is true. But if it is, there are some serious problems here. First off, they didn't know that he had a green card, not a student visa. That's, if true, a huge, huge problem. Like, if you're going to be doing stuff this serious, get your crap together first. And two, when the attorney has to see the warrant and you hang up on them, yeah, that's not okay. You have to show them the warrant you have for this person's arrest. Or if you don't have a warrant, you have to tell them that. The Associated Press has further details on this story. As ICE agents arrived at Khalil's Manhattan residence Saturday night, they also threatened to arrest Khalil's wife, an American citizen who is 8 months pregnant. Yeah, they can't do that. She's a U.S. citizen, so... Khalil's attorney said they were initially informed that he was being held at an immigration detention facility in Elizabeth, New Jersey, but when his wife tried to visit Sunday, she learned he was not there. Greer said she still did not know Khalil's whereabouts as of Sunday night. They eventually found out that he was taken to an ICE detention center in Louisiana. But for a while, they just didn't know where he was, and he disappeared into this system. That's, again, a huge due process problem. Legal immigrants and lawful residents have a right to due process, and if this reporting is truly how it all went down, I don't think this man's right to due process was respected. And that is unacceptable, no matter how you feel about the broader question of deporting people who express support for terror. Now, a judge has ordered a pause to this while all the legality can be figured out. The AP reports a federal judge in New York City ordered Monday that Khalil not be deported while the court consider a legal challenge brought by his lawyers. A hearing is scheduled for Wednesday. I think this is correct. They shouldn't rush and deport him from the country until the legality of all this has been sorted out. Ultimately, this whole situation is kind of a mess. I do object to how this particular individual has been treated, even if I do find many of his views abhorrent. And even if they are legally allowed to deport people who are pro-Hamas, I think the Trump administration needs to get its crap in order and stop conflating things and not having all the details set before moving forward with such serious actions. That said, many Democrats are totally jumping the gun, acting as if the very project of deporting people, non-citizens who express open support for terrorism is somehow not just illegitimate, but fascist. And while it might be debatable, it's not dystopian to do that. They're also already lionizing this man, Mahmoud Khalil, as if he's some sort of hero or martyr. That's also a mistake. The right way to defend this man's rights would be to make clear that it's about the principles of due process and free speech, but not laud such a deeply radical person as if he's some hero. Think of how that resonates with Jewish voters or Jewish Democrats to see Democratic elected officials not just standing up for rights, which even terrible or people accused of terrible things deserve rights and fairness, but actually like kind of hero worshiping a guy who, from their view, and understandably so, has some pretty abhorrent views and is accused of literally supporting terrorism and the terror attacks on October 7th. Lionizing that kind of a person is not going to go over well with a whole lot of people if the Democratic Party really goes all in on that. Just generally speaking, free speech is one of the defining values at the core of my politics and everything I believe in. But I also think that as long as due process is followed, and that's a big precondition, people who come here as immigrants and commit crimes like illegally occupying businesses can and should be sent home. That said, I'm also deeply uncomfortable with a kind of government purge targeting ideologies and ideas they don't like with legal consequences. But there is a line somewhere when it comes to supporting terror. I honestly just don't have all the answers on this one. It is incredibly complicated, it's an evolving situation, and there's some really serious competing principles and values at play. But I just wanted to present you guys with the facts, a little bit of my analysis, perspectives from both sides, and then you can all make up your minds for yourselves. Do let me know where you come down on this issue and this question. I really do want to hear from you guys in the comments. I'll be keeping an eye out.